First time I saw Srila Prabhupada was, I believe it was 1967 or 68, and he had just come to San Francisco. And there was a meeting that was called by the mayor's office of various groups around the Haight-Ashbury area and the city of San Francisco. They were anticipating thousands and thousands of kids coming to San Francisco, Summer of Love. So I was with a group called the Diggers. We were kind of a revolutionary group that would beg, borrow, or steal food and set up free kitchens in the Golden Gate Park and so forth. And we had a storefront at 520 Frederick Street. And as it turns out, the devotees opened the storefront right next door at 518 Frederick Street. And at this meeting, they had the mayor of the city, the chief of police, various medical personnel from hospitals. They had a couple of other yoga groups that were there. There were about 15 people there. And I was there with another fellow representing the Diggers. And Prabhupada came there with Hayagriva. And everybody there made their presentation, what they were going to do to help and so forth. And it came time for Prabhupada to talk, and Prabhupada pointed to Hayagriva and said, "You talk." And Hayagriva told about the temple that we were doing, and I don't quite remember the conversation. But even at this point, I just kept looking at this little Indian fellow who was just sitting there. And he was just kind of moving his head back and forth and just listening to Hayagriva. And then they brought out a plate of fruits, like to give to everybody who was there as a guest. And Hayagriva picked it up and offered it to Srila Prabhupada first. And Prabhupada picked a grape up and he threw it in the air, like threw it right in his mouth. And it was like, I was sitting next to him, and it was the most amazing thing in the world to see that. And that was the first time that I ever seen Srila Prabhupada. It was just an amazing thing. I'd never seen anybody do that. It was quite incredible. Then the Diggers were invited to go out to there was a gentleman named Lou Gottlieb who had a farm outside, I think in Sausalito, called Morning Star Ranch. And this fellow came and invited the Diggers to come out there and, farm it and do things like that. So I went out there to live at that farm, and I'd go back and forth to San Francisco from there. And then one day we heard that the devotees from the temple were going to come out there to the Morning Star Ranch. And Prabhupada was going to come out there. So we didn't know what to expect, or nobody really understood what he was doing. We used to go in and the parks, and we used to see him chanting there, and I used to go around, stand around the kirtans there, but nobody had really had any direct contact with him. And we had built a platform, a little Vyasasan for him in the woods, on top of a hill, underneath a cross that was out in the woods there on the guy's property. And I remember going out and picking Scotch broom flowers, which are a yellow flower, and decorating the thing for Prabhupada there. And so Prabhupada was picked up by this fellow Lou Gottlieb in the city in a Volvo. And Lou told me the story that he said to Prabhupada, "Put your seatbelt on." And Prabhupada said something like, "Krishna is my seatbelt." He remembered that, he told me that story. So Prabhupada got there, and I happened to be in the garden. Just, I don't know if you can say this on tape, but it was, most of the people walked around with no clothing on or anything like that up there. I happened to be in a garden when Prabhupada arrived. I was digging potatoes in the garden there. And Lou Gottlieb brought him over, and there I was, and shook Prabhupada's hand. I was standing there, and Prabhupada did say, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm digging potatoes." He said, "No, what are you doing with your life?" And I don't even remember what I said. I do remember what he said, but I don't remember what I answered there. And then we went, everybody went, and Prabhupada went up to the hill there and chanted. And the thing about, after Prabhupada left there, every evening all the people who were living there used to gather together for a common meal. And we'd all stand around holding hands, and we'd just stay there, you know, with eyes closed, not doing anything, you know. But that very evening, in that meal, everybody started chanting Hare Krishna. And that became one of the things there. On that farm, there were many other, at the time, Vishnu John lived there, Tamal Krishna lived there, Madhavisa, you know, so many people became devotees off of that farm because of Srila Prabhupada's visit there, and the enthusiasm for the chanting and so forth.
When I first met Srila Prabhupada, I was a member of the Namhata party in Japan, and it was in 1975, I believe, and the Vrindavan temple was under construction, and we were collecting for that and supplying Prabhupada with the funds for the construction of Vrindavan, Mayapur, and Bombay. So one time I had the opportunity, Guru Kripa Maharaj took me along with him to India to bring some Lakshmi to Srila Prabhupada. And this was cash that we had collected in Japan. And we flew from Japan to Delhi, and we traveled up to Vrindavan. And so when we arrived, the temple was under construction at that time. And I know the guest house was for sure. Really, the whole temple, it wasn't opened yet. So we arrived there, and it was in the probably afternoon. And we went to Srila Prabhupada's office. He was sitting behind his curved desk there. And we came in, offered our obeisances to Srila Prabhupada, and then Guru Kripa Maharaj put this briefcase with the money on Srila Prabhupada's desk for him. And I can't remember Prabhupada exactly what happened. Prabhupada opened it or what. At some point, anyway, the amount had to be revealed. So Guru Kripa Maharaj said, "There's $108,000 in there, Srila Prabhupada." And Srila Prabhupada said, "Thank you very much. 109 would be better." So when it came to matters of Lakshmi to be engaged in Krishna's service, I think Srila Prabhupada was showing us that auspicious numbers are very auspicious, but more is even more auspicious.
I got to do some service cleaning his apartment, and got a taste of what submissiveness is. He actually demanded submissiveness somewhere out of the deep depths of my heart. I guess I came a little bit of submissiveness after many, many years of just being the independent person. So this is what what created that faith in Srila Prabhupada, that actually we are servants. And so that solved the problem of who we are, where we are, and decided I never was going to leave. And so from then on, it's just been constant service, because he convinced us that we were servants of the servant of the servant. And he was definitely the person to serve, because he had all the answers. And he had the engagement for us, the positive alternative that we didn't have before. I mean, I always thought I was spiritual, but I had no engagement in spiritual life. So Srila Prabhupada was so kind to immediately engage us. I mean, the minute I walked in the temple, can you polish the brass? Can you make a garland? I didn't know what a garland was. So that's what was so fulfilling. That was the taste, the little nectar that he planted in all of us, is that service to Krishna. And just by being submissive, then you got that nectar. And the more submissive you became, the more dependent you came on Srila Prabhupada, the more nectar you would get. And so that's the most convincing factor that keeps us in the movement, is because Prabhupada has given us so much service to do, and there's still so much more to do. That whole other 50% of our ashram is there waiting for us to do.
I don't have a, I was so raw, or what do I say, innocent or something. I didn't know that it would be okay to go where Prabhupada was giving darshan and actually listen. So I was like someplace else, looking through windows to try to get a glimpse of him. I mean, devotees were kind of funny. Like, I was sitting there, and sometimes I would see devotees, like heads pop up outside the windows of the house. They're trying to get a glimpse of Prabhupada, So one day Arvinda said, yeah, you can go in there. I said, really? So I sat down, and it was just at the end, Prabhupada was speaking, and he was comparing this material world to a dream. He said, isn't it just like a dream? He said, suppose, you have a dream and you think you're the king. You really think you're the king. But when you wake up, what reality is there? So similarly, we have these bodies, we have this identity as American or Indian or whatever. But what is the reality of that thing? And it was finished.
This was during the Rath Yatra festival in San Francisco in 1975. So Srila Prabhupada was giving a class about who is eligible for punishment, who is qualified to be punished. And he said, according to someone's mental state and the crime that he has performed, he's brought in front of the magistrate, and then he is judged. And he said that children are not punishable. And so there was a lot of devotees in the audience, and everyone cheered. Children are not punishable. And then he said, women are also not punishable. And everyone cheered even more. And then, all of a sudden, a child cried. And Bahalasva stands up and says, okay, all children out of the temple. And Prabhupada said, no, that's okay. Children are not punishable. So everyone laughed. And then he said, so also women are not punishable, but don't take advantage. And then also everyone laughed. And he said, children are not punishable, women are not punishable, saintly people are not punishable, and old men are not punishable, and cows are not punishable. So he said, in this assembly, no one is punishable. Everybody cheered. That's my big story.
We had an engagement for Prabhupada that evening at the WRUF, the radio station at the University of Florida, student run. But it was a very professional place, and Prabhupada had a particular interviewer who was trying to provoke him, trying to ruffle him, and asking questions like, so what do you bring to the world, this country, that we already have in God? We have so many churches. What are you bringing that is so special? And Prabhupada said, I am bringing the authorized version. Authorized by who, he says. He said, by Lord Chaitanya. The man would never know who Lord Chaitanya was, but he said it so beautifully. He's authorized by Lord Chaitanya. And then he would continue with his antagonistic questions. And finally he said, so how would I recognize someone who is a follower of Krishna consciousness, like that, a very strong accent. And Prabhupada said, he would be a perfect gentleman. And then we all realized that how beautifully and what a perfect gentleman Prabhupada had just been amidst those antagonistic type of questions. So we're all just falling in love with Prabhupada at every moment because it's impossible not to. His heart is so kind, and even kind to this man who was trying to provoke him. So,
I guess one impression I had was when one time I saw him opening up the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he was saying, he put on his reading glasses and he said, as it's stated in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And that impressed me. I grew up with a lot of books around me, and I just saw a difference between Srila Prabhupada and so many of the other gurus that were coming at that time, and avatars and what have you, that he was actually speaking from Shastra.
One thing that I remember that was a one-liner, and I just love the way Prabhupada worded it, because sometimes he would use words or a sentence in a way that no one else spoke that way. So he said, if you chant 16 rounds daily, your deathlessness is guaranteed. So I never heard such a word, deathlessness. And I still think about that. It was such a beautiful way of saying it. So deathlessness is guaranteed.
Somewhere in, I don't know when it occurred, but I was with Srila Prabhupada in Delhi. And fortunately I was good friends with Shruti Kirti, so he was always allowing me to get a little close to Srila Prabhupada. And like that same mood that I had had in Dallas, I was always trying to figure out some way to be in a space. So somehow or another, I was helping Shruti Kirti, backing him up, serving Srila Prabhupada, doing some of the errands and running. And then everyone left, and Shruti Kirti said, gave me the bell, you know, so I was the one who, if Prabhupada rang the bell, that I had to go see what he wanted. And I was certainly hoping he wouldn't ring the bell for some reason. It was too intimate or too much responsibility. But anyhow, Prabhupada did ring the bell, and I came and offered my obeisances. And he's standing in a room next to his room, and he's looking at the wall, and there's really nothing on the wall. But he's asking me about the painting, and asking me, what do I think about the painting? Should the painting be here? And I couldn't figure out whether he was asking me if the room should be painted, what color the paint should be, or should we put some painting on the wall? And I kept, whatever you think, Srila Prabhupada. You know, I was trying to get out of thinking about it, like just throw it back at Prabhupada, whatever you say, Srila Prabhupada. He goes, no, not whatever I say. What do you think? What do you think? What do you want to do for Krishna? And it was a very instructive moment, you know, and I don't even know what I said at that point, because I still didn't know what he was talking about, so it was incredibly awkward, but I didn't forget that part of it, you know, that he was very keen on having us not just following rules and regulations, but was keen on having us think for ourselves and finding out how we could serve Krishna. And that Krishna was in our hands also, and he had given him to us, and now we were to use the best of our intelligence how to serve him.
Himavati, she told me one story that they were in India because they went on the first trip with Srila Prabhupada to India, and they were living in tents. And I'm not sure where this was, but they were all living in tents. And Hansatuda refused to sleep with her in a tent. And all the other couples were sleeping together in their tents. So she snuck into Srila Prabhupada's room and slept in his closet. So the next morning, she got up and snuck out and went outside. And she said that day, Prabhupada called her into his quarters. He said, Himavati, you cannot sleep in my closet. This will cause rumors. People will think I'm having young girls, my students are sleeping in my room. He said, this is not right. Why are you doing this? Don't you have a tent to stay? She said, yes, but everyone's sleeping with their husbands in their tents, and Hansaduta won't stay with me. So Srila Prabhupada said, okay, I'm going to have a meeting with everyone. And she said he called everybody together, and he said, okay, now you're all going to take sannyas. Yeah. And she said the look on all of their faces was, what? Then he said, sannyas, you sleep separate from your wives. The wives sleep in one tent, and the men sleep in the other. She also told me that she had a cat when she first met Srila Prabhupada. And she said one day Srila Prabhupada came, and he told her maybe she shouldn't have animals. But she said he was so gentle about it, and she was very attached to this cat. But she said one day Srila Prabhupada came to their apartment and just touched the cat with his foot. And she said about 2 days later the cat died. She said it wasn't like he kicked it or anything, but just touched it, nudged it, and the cat left its body. And she said it rid her of all of that attachment. It was just gone with that. But she was a wealth of stories. He was so kind to her when he'd come to the manor. He was always very kind to her, and said she's a great wife because she can cook and sew. She was a great cook and a seamstress.
The first time I saw Srila Prabhupada was San Francisco Airport. I had joined a van. I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I was 17, and I saw a van pull up at a gas station full of devotees, and I knew there was a big Moody Blues concert going to happen down the street. So I ran out. I said, I'm going to go get a ride with them. And the guy I was with goes, I'm not riding with those guys. So I ran over to the van, just thinking I'm going to get a ride to this concert. I said, you guys going to the concert? They said, yeah, get in. So I get in the van, and Mrigendra hands me a Gita, a Nectar of Devotion, and a Bhagavatam. Kind of piles me up. Give a donation. I sit in the van, he just hits me up. And I happen to have $90 in my pocket. So I pulled out a 20 and gave it to him. So I'm sitting in the van, and they're all in dhotis and tilak and stuff. And we go down to the concert. And when we get to the concert, we have a kirtan in the van for maybe 15, 20 minutes. After the kirtan, they all put on plain clothes and wigs. And they go, we're going to distribute this incense and these books at this concert. And would you like to help us? I'm like, well, okay, sure. So they give me a big pile of incense and some little books. And we're standing there, giving people incense and saying, give a donation for Bangladesh. And my friends were coming up going, Makriti, what the hell? What are you doing? And I'm giving them books and incense, and people are giving donations. And I had a ticket, and I sold it. And after everybody went in the concert, the devotees said, well, we're going to the temple. You want to come with? And I just said, okay. I just said, forget the concert. For some reason, I was attracted to this. And the temple was from Ann Arbor, maybe 50 miles out to Detroit. So we went out to Detroit, and we walked in, and Govardhan came down. I was like a macrobiotic at the time, eating brown rice, and that was it, miso soup and stuff. And I get there, and Govardhan comes down with a maha plate. And he's, on that maha plate are puris with powdered sugar and halva and gulab jamuns and hot milk. And he's like, here. And I hadn't eaten anything like that for about a year. And I saw it, and I was like, wow. And I just ate that. And then we went to bed. And they said, we're going to wake you up early, so don't be surprised. And it seemed like I just laid down. And the next thing you know, they're clanging cartels down there in the Brahmachari ashram in Detroit Temple. It was down in the basement of the temple. Anyway, so I went to Mangalartik, and they wrapped me in a dhoti and put some tilak on my head. And I said, can you take me back to Ann Arbor today? And Prabhanu, who was the party leader, said, yeah, sure, we'll take you back. So on the way to Ann Arbor, he said, you want to stop and distribute a few more books before? So we stopped, and we did Bhagavad Gita. We went to a Pier 1, and the manager said we could do it. I couldn't believe it. He said, sure. We put cases of Bhagavad Gitas right in the foyer, right there, and there was 2 doors. And he let us stand there for hours and sell Bhagavad Gitas. So by the time the day was over, Mrigendra said, you still want to go back to Ann Arbor? And I said, let's just go to the temple. So we went back to the temple, had prasadam. I did that for maybe 4 days. And finally, we were driving around doing Sankirtan on the 4th day, and Prabhanu said, you don't mind if we don't go to Ann Arbor, do you? And I said, nah, I don't care. So we went to Cleveland, which was the temple they were from. And so I joined. I joined a van. I just never left. So that was that was what happened to me.
So that
and
was your first contact.
that was my first contact. But what we did on that party, because Mergenda was into travel and Sankirtan, that's what we did. And there was an expo out there in Spokane. So we convinced the president, if we go to Spokane, we do this expo, we'll do huge, and then we get to go to San Francisco Rath Yatra. So that was when we went to San Francisco and saw Prabhupada come in the airport. That's the first time I saw him.
He wrote me, you know, I have a bunch of letters that he wrote. I was president in Victoria, British Columbia, and due to some immigration infraction, when I went to reapply to stay in the country, they arrested me, and they put me in the immigration jail there. And that very next week, I got a letter from Srila Prabhupada saying, oh, this is, not knowing that I was in jail, said, oh, this is the best thing going, you know, I had written him that we were traveling, distributing books up in Canada at the time. Oh, that is a very good program, that is the best. Sometimes you will run into great difficulties. Talked about the chanting and when the Chankazis stopped the chanting. So I was in jail and not knowing, and so I get this letter saying, good boy. Glad, not that I'm glad to see you in jail, but you're doing the right thing, you know, you're going to get problems like that.
First of all, he was listening to Krishna book reading, and it was a story when Krishna and Balaram were being naughty and stealing the butter and yogurt. And he was sitting on a bench, no back or anything like that. And he was really relishing what a rascal Krishna and Balaram were. And then it got to the point where they got chastised. And then they passed urine on the floor. And Prabhupada laughed and he leaned back. And I thought, oh no, he's going to fall off the bench. But he really enjoyed that. You could kind of see his connection with Krishna Balaram. There was a cowherd boy there. And then we heard these doors slamming in the parking lot right next door. And he goes, oh, where's everybody going? And they go, they're going on Sankirtan, Prabhupada. He goes, ah, yes. This is Lord Nityananda's movement, going door to door and getting everyone to chant Hare Krishna. And so Prabhupada was so pleased with Sankirtan. That's always sunk very deeply in my heart. That in Los Angeles, he was always encouraging us to go door to door and to get everyone to chant, everyone we meet. And so that has always imbibed me to see that that's the foremost instruction of Srila Prabhupada, is to chant, be happy, and make others happy. And so that's a big engagement for us, our whole lifetime engagement.
I think some of the most important instructions I ever heard from Srila Prabhupada were regarding the chanting of Krishna's holy names. One time I remember in particular was 1977 at the Kumbh Mela. And Srila Prabhupada had been there, and that year was a huge gathering. That was not just the ordinary Mela, that was the Kumbh Mela. Everybody, every yogi in India was there. It was the hugest. And anyway, Srila Prabhupada had been there for some days, and then it came to the time when he was going to leave. And we went to see Srila Prabhupada off, all the devotees who were there, and there were many. So Prabhupada, instead of just going to his car, we received word that we all had to come to a tent that was there, that Srila Prabhupada was there, and he wanted to see us in his tent. So we sat down, and Srila Prabhupada said that it had come to his attention that some devotees were beginning to add the word bhaja to the Hare Krishna mantra, but chanting bhaja Hare Krishna. So Prabhupada told us the Hare Krishna mantra is perfect, and nothing should be added to it. And that he did not want us to add that, bhaja Hare Krishna. Just keep it Hare Krishna, the 16 words of the Hare Krishna mantra that he had taught us. So that was very instructive.
The devotees were going to Allahabad to see Prabhupada at the Kumbh Mela, and they were trying to find someone to make rasgullas for Srila Prabhupada. So I said, okay, I'll make them for him. And I made the rasgullas, and they took them, Gaura Hari Prabhu took them to India to give to Srila Prabhupada. And I never found out what happened. And a while later, I found out that Srila Prabhupada, he ate one of the rasgullas, and he passed them around. He said, even the Queen of England could not eat rasgullas made in London, brought here to India. Which was nice.
In that place, just simple experiences, and some of them may seem mundane, but just nothing is mundane with Prabhupada. For example, in the house there, one time Prabhupada was in the bathroom, came out of the bathroom, and I didn't know he was in there, so I needed to use the bathroom. And all of a sudden the door opens, and there's, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Jagat Guru. And, whoa, what do I do? There's no place to offer obeisances. I don't know what to do. And Prabhupada, Jai. That's all he said. And then, you may remember a section of the Bhagavatam, Jada Yoga, Rishabh Dev, that he does this thing where he, lie down in his own stool and his own urine because it's like lotus flowers. It smells like lotus flowers because he's so pure. So I walk into that bathroom after Prabhupada used it, and oh my God, it was like flowers, It was just like an overwhelmingly beautiful scent in the bathroom.
There was also one light that was always on across the street from the temple. It was always, somehow or another, this light was always on, even though it was daylight. And Prabhupada had told the devotees, what is that light doing on? So it went on. He was very, very concerned that the light should not remain on during the day. This is conservation of Krishna's energy. Also, sometimes he would be writing, drop a pen, and then put it to his head. And he saw everything in relation to Krishna.
So this was in Chicago Rath Yatra. And most devotees who had some ingenuity, they would find a way to get to Srila Prabhupada, who was anywhere nearby. And so even money was no obstacle because we would, collect along the way or something and get there. So I was just, I had to see Srila Prabhupada, I had to go to Rath Yatra. So this particular event took place in his room. And again, a room conversation. And I was sitting really close to Prabhupada. It was right just 2 feet in front of him. And Prabhupada was sitting on the floor very casually with his knee up like he does sometimes, and looking so relaxed and peaceful and angelic. And right next to him was a Vyasa-san. But Prabhupada was sitting on the floor, right next to the Vyasa. I didn't really take notice of it so much, but the reporters were coming in and they were going to ask some questions. And they were asking about Prabhupada's cars and why do you have so many cars, and Prabhupada gave his answers to those questions. And finally this reporter said, why aren't you sitting on that big seat? Like that, a little antagonistic, Why aren't you sitting on that big seat? And Prabhupada looked right at her and he said, because you would be envious. Boom. That was that. Didn't pull any punches at all, just because you would be envious. And then I realized that we have to keep ourselves humble and simple. We should also live simply. And Prabhupada always did all of his teaching from the ground level. He didn't have a big fancy desk with a big slab of glass on top, like we find nowadays so much these days. We cannot make ourselves artificially important. Either we're important or we're not important. You can't artificially prop it up with some... Anyway, so Prabhupada was teaching like that as soon as you put yourself in some opulence, that immediately it creates envy. It doesn't create respect, it creates envy. And so, another very, very strong lesson right there, and which should be considered every time we think that we're important. Because Prabhupada always remained the most perfect, humble person throughout everything. Whenever he did anything, the most brilliant, articulate, celestial being that ever came to this dark planet.
There was one encounter which was, we can call a silent one, in a group, with no direct interaction. Actually, there was direct interaction through prasadam. It was the well-known ceremony of Prabhupada cutting the apple and distributing an apple slice to everybody. And at a certain point, I was really down and out and living on the street, or even if I was still in my apartment at that time, I had no money. And that one slice of apple was both materially and spiritually very gratifying. It was unusually tasty for just an apple slice. And you can see the Swami cutting the apple, taking one in his special way, for us very special. And then immediately after we all took our little taste of apple, a basket came around and everyone would throw in a dime or a quarter or something like that. I didn't have any money, but they let me take the apple. So the principle there, of course, is the principle of prasadam. How Srila Prabhupada would humbly, even at the very beginning, fulfill his duty of giving us Krishna's mercy in the form of prasadam. Little did we know that in this case it was Maha prasadam.
So there's a few remembrances I have that are one-liners that deeply impressed me and have stuck with me throughout the years. Prabhupada said that there are 3 ways to transcend this body. He said by chanting, by dancing, and by playing a musical instrument. So in the past 30-some years, I have factually experienced that. The chanting, obviously, we could get ecstatic and forget everything and just absorb in that. Well, since I've been here in Florida, and sometimes the temperatures you just can't even imagine, in the summertime, dancing in ecstasy, and you feel like you're about to leave your body or fall over, and all of a sudden, you go in for another hour dancing like a crazy person, and you completely forget all your bodily pains. And I think about that when Prabhupada said that, because it's actually, you can transcend your body because it's a spiritual activity. And many a times I was leading kirtan playing the mridanga, and after about an hour my arms felt like jello and my mind was screaming, I can't go any further. And all of a sudden I went off to this, absorbed in the chanting, and went on for another hour completely oblivious, not even feeling any pain. And I remember those instructions that Prabhupada said, so I've experienced them all.
So before I'm going to Africa, Brahmananda, Tamal Krishna, Srila Prabhupada, and Shruti Kirti are living in a house right near the Bombay temple. And Brahmananda asked me to come and live there too, so that I can help more or less be a sannyasi servant and also back up Shruti Kirti. So I'm doing all the shopping for the house and the laundry for everyone, and maybe taking Prabhupada's plate away, washing the dishes. It was a really wonderful engagement. It was like it was like just living in the spiritual master's house with a few devotees and being engaged all the time. And then in the evening there'd be programs. And one time I was asked to arrange a car for Srila Prabhupada. So I don't know who or what I did, but I found somebody to bring a car. And the person shows up with the car, and it's an American lowrider car, just this really honky thing, And Tamal Krishna's looking at me like, oh, you're toast here. This is really bad. Anyhow, Prabhupada doesn't bat an eye, gets in the car and rides to the temple, and there's a kind of a young, hip Bombay guy driving the car. It was his car, and it was quite fine. Then another car experience, I'm walking to get into the car with Srila Prabhupada, and I'm carrying his bags. I think it's just me and Shruti Kirti. And Prabhupada steps into the car, and as he's getting in, just as he's sitting down, he goes, Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shri Vasudeva Gaur Bhaktavrinda. And it was literally as if the universe had stopped. Everything became so thick and heavy. However the mood in which Prabhupada had said that, it just, both Shruti, Kirti, and I were more or less just stunned for a moment. So just a very simple memory of something.
And another time, he was so sweet to the women. Himavati was living there at the time, and Srila Prabhupada was leaving, and he used to go out at the manor in the temple room. There's a door out the side that goes into the circle. And so Srila Prabhupada used to go out that way. And he was going, I think, to Bury Place at the time. And he turned around and he said, "Himavati, are you coming?" And there were so many sannyasis there and all, but he immediately, "Himavati, are you?" She said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada," and she ran back to the shoe room to get her shoes and ran around, and he had her come into his car and go with. So that was so sweet. He was always so kind.
I've heard some devotees say and preach that ecstatic dancing, wild, is not the right way to perform kirtan. That, the Prabhupada step is the ideal way, but that to go wild and dance like madmen is not acceptable. Well, I can tell you 2 incidents that definitely prove to me that that was not the case. In our Sankirtan party, the Namhata, we used to do some pretty wild dancing in kirtans, including the hot step, the hot foot, in which we just, just step it so hard, and just many crazy whirling around and swinging each other around and everything. So when we were in Hawaii with Srila Prabhupada, there was a big kirtan one evening. And I remember Yasodanandan Swami, he could jump like a mile high as he pounded his mridanga, almost in the dust. It hit so hard. He was leaping so high. And the devotees were all, especially the Namhata devotees and all the Hawaii devotees, were dancing like madmen in that kirtan. And Srila Prabhupada was on his Vyasasana there for it. So at the end of the kirtan, Srila Prabhupada began to say the Jayom prayers. And when he got to all glories to the assembled devotees, he changed it. All glories to the assembled dancers. All glories to the assembled dancers. Like that.
In India, I was there for the Krishna Balaram opening, and I think the most wonderful part was when we went in procession with Srila Prabhupada down to Vrindavan, and you really felt like, yes, this is our master, our guide, this is the king coming back, bringing all his entourage with him, everything that he's collected, his booty and everything from the West, and with the elephants and the procession and the torches going down to the most unexpected place we could ever imagine, down right in Vrindavan. And just to see Prabhupada marching with his army of soldiers, we felt very, very proud, very fortunate to be with him, be part of his army. And I've always felt like, yes, we're just one of Prabhupada's soldiers.
We all went into San Francisco airport to wait for Prabhupada, and there was hundreds of devotees, with flowers and garlands, and kirtan was going on, and it was amazing when Prabhupada finally emerged out from, because we were watching all these people come in, and we're like, where is he, where is he? And there he came, and we all paid obeisances and got up, and I looked at Prabhupada, and I don't know what it was just like, it was something that you never experienced before, although I had been anticipating it for so long by reading and listening to his lectures and stuff. And when I saw him, I didn't know what to think. I just felt like I was so lucky to be there. And there he is. There's my spiritual master. And I remember Guru Kripa came walking up, and I talked to him later about it. He had a check for $80,000, and he came up to Prabhupada and he handed him a check. And Prabhupada took off his chadar and wrapped it around Guru Kripa. And I remember that really clearly because I was close there, and all those devotees were there, and there was Guru Kripa and Prabhupada, and it was amazing. that was it on the airport thing. At the Rath Yatra parade, Mrigendra said, don't just go and chant and dance, distribute books, you know. So we were out distributing books in front of the cart. And then at the end, when Prabhupada was on the stage and gave the lecture, I was there in front of the stage just looking at Prabhupada and listening and listening. And at one point, and I've heard other devotees have said this happened to them too, Prabhupada looked right through me. He looked in, it was some kind of, almost like electronic kind of, it was something I'd never experienced, but I knew that he knew me, and I knew that he looked right into me. And it was just, I almost fainted. I was freaked out for a second. Then he turned away, and and I was just surprised. I had heard those kind of things before, but I never experienced it. But that was the time when Prabhupada looked into my soul. That's what it felt like. And that was a really nice thing.
We were in Africa next. And my friend here, Paramesvari, and Bivakar, and somebody else, maybe, Charnarvindam, we're sitting around. Bivakar's got his nose in the atlas. He said, oh, look at here. There's this island out 1,000 miles off the coast, east coast. Got like a million Hindus on it or something. Why don't we go there? So in Prabhupada style, actually Paramesvari went there first, and they said, yeah, it's a good place. So Bivakar and I went next. And Bivakar and I went Prabhupada style. And what that means is we had a trunk of books, enough rupees that you could count on your fingers, and a letter of introduction. And we started. And that is not such a rich place. So it was a bit of a struggle. But after, I don't know, maybe a year or so, somebody came up with the idea. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Mr. Gautam Tilak, who was the secretary to the Minister of Agriculture in Mauritius, that why doesn't your guru meet the Prime Minister? And that was suggested. Prabhupada said, yeah, it's very good. Prabhupada would like to speak to leading people. So we made all kinds of arrangements, and Prabhupada came once. Somebody donated to us for a couple months a beautiful beach house to stay in for Srila Prabhupada. And then he went to South Africa, he came back and stayed in another beach house in the south. It was very nice. As far as that goes, a couple of the experiences that stand out in my mind. One time, for example, Prabhupada was going on the morning walk. And in Mauritius, the main crop was sugar cane at that time. And some of the guys on the sugar cane trucks were a little silly, I'll say. And they like to mock us. They see us and Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Dam, like this. So they did that even when we were walking with Srila Prabhupada. And so one of the devotees said, Prabhupada, what happens to a person when they chant Hare Krishna like that? And with a lot of conviction, he said, they are liberated.
I went on one morning walk with Srila Prabhupada. And we were going up the road from Bhaktivedanta Manor. And I kind of went to the front because I usually had to do service at the temple. So this was the one that I got to sneak out on. And Srila Prabhupada was talking about Krishna. Somebody said to Prabhupada, oh, Srila Prabhupada, why, we hear that in Vrindavan, they were all dressed in so many stones and jewels, and how did they do that without mining? And then Prabhupada said, because Krishna was present. He said, then Mother Earth wanted to give. Krishna and Balaram were there, so he said, the pearls would appear just in the streams and all the jewels, and they could just pick up and make their jewelry. I thought that was really nice.
Most of these things that were all in New Dwarka, because I spent some time there when Prabhupada was there in the early 70s. He said in a lecture, he said, even if you don't feel like dancing, you should force yourself to dance and the bliss will come. So many times, you come in the temple, you might be in the modes and you're feeling tired. And then I remember that and I start to just shuffle back and forth. And after a short period of time, I'm swept away, and we're ecstatically dancing. And it's I remember Prabhupada's instructions saying that, force yourself to dance and the bliss will come. And it's true. and it's not an ordinary experience. We think, oh, it's dancing in the temple, but this is part of our philosophy. Is, as Prabhupada said, dance for the deities. It's an ecstatic, transcendental experience, and it gives him great pleasure.
Another very important instruction to me personally that I heard from Srila Prabhupada was on that morning walk that I went on with him in Vrindavan. He talked about many things that morning. He sat down, we walked out away from the town of Vrindavan and out the other way. And then Prabhupada sat down on the side of the road for a while with cushions. Shrutikirti had brought some cushions and they were fanning him. And Prabhupada sat there and he talked about many things that morning. And one of the things he said, which has always stuck in my mind, is that disciple means instrument in the hands of the spiritual master. Disciple means to be instrument in the hands of the spiritual master. So, that's something that's stuck with me. I can't say I've always fulfilled it, far from it, but I still cherish the thought and hope to. But there's a picture of like a hammer in Srila Prabhupada's hands, and he just uses it for whatever he wants, however he wants, and that's the position of a disciple of a bona fide spiritual master like Srila Prabhupada.
So this was back in Bombay again when I was living in that house with Tamal Krishna, Brahmananda, and Shruti Kirti, and I think it was one day, midday, Prabhupada had called Tamal into his room, and I was more or less Prabhupada's room was there, and then there was a middle room, and I was sitting more or less standing guard or just, being there in the house, a bit on call. And Prabhupada was talking with Tamal, and I began to hear Tamal raising his voice and more or less really arguing vehemently against Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada was talking, the subject was that Tamal should go to China. And Prabhupada was just speaking so calmly, even though Tamal was, in my estimation, I had never heard anyone raise their voice against Srila Prabhupada or an argument. He was just being incredibly strong in his statement. Obviously their relationship in preaching was very intimate, so I was more or less overwhelmed by that. But in retrospect, I remember just hearing Srila Prabhupada's patient voice, that Tamal would throw out some loud objection, and Prabhupada would just kindly diminish that objection and speak very much like a patient father with a enraged child who wasn't following his directions.
I was actually the person in charge of the lady who put the salt in the charnamrita. I had given her, she was a little crazy, but I'd given her that duty. And then when Srila Prabhupada said, at the very end of that whole episode, he said, and she should not do that service anymore. And that struck me as a personal instruction to myself, that you really have to use your discrimination in giving important services to people. So that's one thing I learned from that incident. It was like a stab on my part, although I didn't do it, but I was in charge of that person, so we have to be very responsible for Srila Prabhupada.
This encounter, superficially we can say it was a negative one, because Srila Prabhupada, there were 3 occasions where I could not, he did not allow me to exchange with him or interact. And this was one time where he said, I cannot speak to you now. I have to do my translating. I'm very busy. Now that was not the typical reception. Srila Prabhupada, the door was open. You could just walk in without even knocking and speak with him. That were the instructions from the devotees. Go upstairs and speak with the Swami. But why in this case? This was also in the book, Planting the Seed, this particular episode. Because there was this young girl, and I had a little motorcycle, and I put her on the back of the motorcycle, and I wanted to show off my guru to her. So I guess the principle here is, Tasmad gurum prapadyeta jigyasur shrayo uttamam. In other words, there has to be at least some bit of sincerity in your approach. If you're trying to impress someone else by showing them off your guru, then the guru is not going to become your plaything. So that was another encounter. It was a short one. We left very politely.
It was a letter. It was a letter that one of his godbrothers wrote to him when he first got to New York, and the letter was what would they call them? His godbrothers called him. So what do you see there? And Prabhupada wrote back, he said, I see only demons. I see only demons. So Prabhupada had his work cut out for him, trying to convert a country of demons into devotees. I see only demons. So this is the greatest miracle that Prabhupada said, well, you show me a miracle. And Prabhupada said, yes, these boys and girls are all miracles. They have given up all this material life and they become nice devotees of Krishna. This is the most amazing thing.
One time we were cooking for Srila Prabhupada, and Mandakini was in charge of the cooking, and I was just helping her. And she sent up prasadam, and Prabhupada sent his servant back down and said, taste it before you send it up. I thought that was funny. We were all laughing.
In Mauritius, well, really there were only 3 of us, and when Prabhupada came, I think Pusta Krishna, at that time Swami, came up from South Africa, and Harikesh came, and who was it? Back to Godhead, Bugarba, was that his name? Bhargava came, and a couple others came. So there's still only 9 of us. So we got to do, all of Prabhupada's services. And one thing stands out to me, that he was taking every day a glass of carrot juice in the afternoon. And one day he asked, how many carrots does it take to make this glass of carrot juice? And when he heard the number of carrots it took, he said, no more.
Well, one time I was in Mayapur. This was in 1976, and I was serving on the Pujari crew there. And one day I was collecting Tulsi manjaris from the Tulsi plants that grew around the temple, what they call the Lotus Building now. And all of a sudden, Prabhupada's servant, I think it was Harisari, pretty sure, he yelled down to me, he said, Pundarika, come upstairs, Srila Prabhupada wants to talk to you. Come right now. So I came up to Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada told me, never touch Tulsi with a knife. I'd been cutting with scissors, the Tulsi manjaris, and Prabhupada said, never touch Tulsi with knife. So you're supposed to pick by hand the Tulsi manjaris and never a knife. So whoever's engaged in Tulsi worship should really know this.
There was one time in Mayapur, they have this, where Prabhupada's Vyasasana is a little wall there, and I was sitting right where he walked up the stairs there, and it was hot, and I was nodding out, sleeping, but all around them, there must have been, 15 or 20 sannyasis, and you see all their dandas going down and up and down. And Prabhupada pointed to me and said, wake up. And all of a sudden you see all the dandas straighten up. So I took it as Prabhupada using me to wake everybody up there.
So now I'm going to tell a story that many people have heard before about the famous festival in New Vrindavan in 1972 for Janmashtami and Vyasa Puja. But the ending was actually quite different than anyone has told the story. I think people were half asleep. I was a little trained up in New Dwarka how to run up ahead so I could get myself situated so I could be very close to Prabhupada. So I ran down the mountain about 15 minutes early, knowing that the temple would be very crowded, and planted myself right very, very close to the Vyasasana. Then there was the midnight artik, and I held my ground.
And after the Artik, as everybody knows, Prabhupada said, let's read Krishna book. And this went on for about 2 hours. And I remember I was sitting about 4 feet away from Prabhupada, right dead center, and I was watching him the whole time. And he was just so blissfully absorbed. And you're looking around the temple and devotees are falling asleep. And he was just saying more and more, keep passing the book. Then suddenly the lights go out and it's pitch black. And and you're out in the forest, so it's pitch black. I couldn't see my hands in front of my face. And all you can hear is the scrambling of the New Vrindavan devotees. And it seemed like a very long time. It could have been 5 minutes, could have been 10 minutes. It was a long time that the lights were out. And I kept thinking, I want to see Prabhupada's expression when the lights come on. So I just had my head facing in that direction because I couldn't see a thing. So I was wondering, is he angry? What's he, So after some very long period of time, the lights come on and Prabhupada has this beautiful ear-to-ear grin. And he says, so Krishna is now sitting on the lap of Mother Yasoda. I think you are all tired and we can stop here. And everyone roared, but my hair stood on end because I was listening and we were left off. It was a battle going on in the Krishna book. Krishna wasn't sitting on the lap of Mother Yasoda. And so when he said that, I was thinking, what happened during that time when the lights are off? I pictured a little blue boy sitting on his shoulders. And it was so ecstatic because there he said, Krishna is now sitting on the lap of Mother Yasoda, and we weren't talking about that. So I wanted to share that because no one had seemed to mention that. And to me, it was the most significant thing that here Prabhupada's seeing Krishna sitting on the lap of Mother Yasoda. And it was so ecstatic, and he was so happy. Prabhupada was just so blissful and so compassionate, just telling devotees, now you can go now, it is okay. Krishna is sitting lap of Yasoda. Hare Krishna.
So also I got to drive Srila Prabhupada to the beach every day in the Jeep. And he would sit right next to me. I would sit right next to him. And it was more or less like being, he would chant Govinda prayers while he was riding in the Jeep, and the Jeep had no canopy on it, and we would ride to the beach. And I remember thinking of myself as someone in the World War II driving a great general to a battle station, and he was holding on to the top of the Jeep as we were driving and chanting Govinda prayers. And then we would walk on the beach. So then it came my time to, somewhere during that time, Prabhupada had asked Brahmananda, he said, so who is this boy? Who is this boy Paramesvari? And Brahmananda came and told me that. And, it was like Prabhupada's taking notice of you, he wants to know who you are. And I said, oh, that. I was feeling very enthused because I was about as happily engaged as I had ever been, being more or less a secondary, behind-the-scenes personal backup for Prabhupada. So it was just completely satisfying to be in that situation. And some nights I'd be able to sit and chant japa while Shruti Kirti was massaging Prabhupada's legs. And there was just such a mood of, it was almost as if Krishna's pastimes were being performed in that dark little lit room, and Prabhupada was drifting off and Shruti Kirti was massaging his legs. And I remember thinking how, it really doesn't get any better than this. This is the best position of life I've ever been in the association of my guru. And just daily so many realizations and intimate feelings were coming. So anyhow, it comes time to say goodbye to Srila Prabhupada, because it's time to go to Africa. And I catch Srila Prabhupada at a nice time. I guess he's just had his breakfast, and I go into his room and tell Srila Prabhupada I'm going to Africa. And he was very aware, from Brahmananda, and he was also very encouraging of the devotees who went to Africa, because it was far away and more or less a austere place to go to. And he was exceptionally kind. went in and paid my obeisances and told him I just wanted to say goodbye, Srila Prabhupada, I'm going to Africa and ask for your blessings. And he said, yes. He said, may Krishna give you all his blessings. You are a very nice devotee. You serve Krishna very nicely. I said, here, take my garland. And he gave me his garland, and then he gave me a glass of orange juice and looked at me and said, Hare Krishna, and sent me on my way. So I went out of there more or less feeling like my whole life was successful. That certainly his benediction is there all the time, but when you get it or get that intimate feeling and kindness, it was, yeah, it was very overwhelming. Really sweet experience.
So after wandering around all night, I happened to bop into the temple just in time for Srimad Bhagavatam class. And when I appeared at the door, Srila Prabhupada already knew me. He already knew that I had certain problems, besides birth, death, disease, and old age, and more immediate, unpredictable tendencies. So when I showed up at the door, he stared at me, or almost glared at me, and he knew me by my first name, which was L-O-N. So he said, Lon, did you take LSD? He really put it to me. So I said, no, Swamiji. And I wasn't exactly lying because I hadn't taken it for a while, but this was still going on, the effect of the last overdose. And then he was looking at me. If I remember correctly, the class came to a stop, at least temporarily. And he watched as I made my way right to his asana. And I was so intoxicated that every time I put my foot on the floor was moving away from me. So I was walking in a very unusual way. And he was seriously studying my every move. And he held peace until I landed, so to speak, right in front of him. And I kept my silence and I behaved myself. And the class went on. So there's a lot of principle there. Again, skillful means and devotional service is a razor's edge. From the point of view of Prabhupada, what should I do with this boy? He may disturb the whole class. At the same time, he's a spirit soul. He's part of Krishna. This is Srimad Bhagavatam. He needs to hear it. So giving the benefit of the doubt, step by step, he let me come to him and tolerate it and then went on with the class. So that was, again, this kind of appreciation wasn't something I was able to have on site, but as the years went by, I was able to understand. I hope I'm understanding it correctly.
This was in New Vrindavan on a morning walk, and Prabhupada was walking. There's quite a few devotees, and devotees were talking about this and that, and I was kind of walking in the background a little bit. But the main topic that everybody really wanted to talk about was the war, because at that time Prabhupada said there was certain to be war, because they have made all these weapons, they will use them. And so, being young in our young bodies, we were eager to protect them and find out ways to try to avoid getting bombs dropped on us. So farm projects were springing up everywhere like that. It was that time. And Prabhupada was walking and different questions were being raised, but no one asked a question about the war. So I figured, and Prabhupada also, it was a very well-known fact that Prabhupada says, do not make any plans based on the war. And yet we were all making plans based on the war. So I had the moment came and I blurted out my question. And I asked a question about the war. And Prabhupada did not say a word. And it was like being crushed by a mountain. And all the devotees looked at me like, why you ask a stupid question like that? Prabhupada doesn't want to do that. That's what was in their faces, you know. And Prabhupada never answered the question. I just felt so, why did I ask that question, you know? Prabhupada, we already know that Prabhupada says don't make any plans based on the war. Why am I repeating another question about the war? So it was very instructional. I never mentioned the war again, not to anyone. that topic was finished in my life. So that's how that was instructional. So.
And one time I got in big trouble. This was in Mayapur, and probably many of you devotees that hear this now, you're going to blame me for it if you never knew the true cause. But it was sugarcane season. And they were harvesting the sugarcane, and all the devotees were getting pieces of sugarcane and chew on them, you know, enjoying the sweetness of the sugarcane. And I had chewed on some, and our room for the devotees from our party was on the top floor of the temple, what they call Lotus Building now. And somehow or other, I had like stashed this chewed remnants of sugar cane somewhere over the railing in an inconspicuous place. But Srila Prabhupada, he never missed anything. He'd come to a temple and anything out of order, he would see it, like he had eyes for it. Krishna gave him the eyes. So he saw that, he found that, and he became very angry that devotees were being given the privilege to be able to stay in those nice quarters, and they were abusing that privilege by making a mess there, you know, chewed sugarcane remnants, you know, stashed some there. And so at that time, Prabhupada, I don't remember exactly what words he spoke, but he sent all the devotees who were living in that building, he made us go out and live on the wall around Mayapur. There were those very small little rooms out there. And he said we all had to leave those quarters because we were not qualified to stay in them. And he sent us out to the mosquito-infested wall to stay. And he told us not to eat sugarcane anymore. So I didn't know exactly what he meant by anymore, but to this day I've never ever had any more sugarcane.
Brahmananda had gone back to India for a program, and during that time, somehow or another, Prabhanu was there, and we had been collecting a lot, and I got to pay for the whole temple with our collections, and Prabhupada had written me a letter saying that he had always wanted the temple to be paid for, and that I had done that in Brahmananda's absence, and he was very grateful for that, and that this preaching work to the African devotees is the most important preaching in the world, and we must continue to do this. You know. So having gone to Africa after receiving that garland and blessing from Prabhupada and just the personal contact, I was probably as fired up in my own personal preaching as I had ever been, because and everything was falling into place. I was extremely successful in dealing with Indians, and it was just very inspired. So for a great length of time, that enthusiasm was there. But gradually it did wane, and I had my difficulties in Africa. And one of them was that I had misappropriated some funds and bought this Rolex watch. And I actually bought it for myself. It was one with a striped gold string down it with a gold around it. Anyhow, so I go to India, and I'm feeling really mortified that I've done this. You know, I'm a brahmachari, and watches were kind of like the thing that you could be attached to or something. It was, even though it's bogus, still everybody had watches. So anyhow, I on my going back to India, I've decided I want to give this to Srila Prabhupada. So when I get to Bombay, I remember Prabhupada was walking with a group of devotees, and I walk up and pay my obeisances, and Prabhupada folds his hands and says hello to me, with pranams, and I'm just overwhelmed that he's even noticing me or remembers me, in any way, that his intimate way of dealing with people again. So Shruti Kirti makes an arrangement for me to come up and see Srila Prabhupada, and it's just myself, Shruti Kirti and Paramahamsa, and sitting at a table just 2 feet away from Srila Prabhupada, and he's sitting across from me. And I give him the Rolex watch, and he goes, "Oh, Rolex." And he puts it on, and he has another watch on, so he has both watches on at that point. And he's looking, and he looks at me, and he begins lecturing on the purity of Lord Chaitanya's movement, how that we are only different from others because we are following purely these principles that Lord Chaitanya has presented, and that will be the success of our movement, is that if we follow everything purely. And he went on for maybe 20 minutes, a half hour, personally lecturing me on the purity of Lord Chaitanya's movement and how it was important not to spend a farthing of Krishna's money on sense gratification. And, you know, I felt from the very beginning he had seen all the way through me and knew that I had got this for myself, and this was my act of patrician redemption, giving it to him. But he was just extremely gracious and warm and strict all at the same time, you know, and Shruti Kirti and Paramahansa were more or less amazed at the talk too. It was just, you know, that he had taken so much time, and so I got to pay my obeisances and leave. And I think that was pretty much the last time I really had personal contact with Srila Prabhupada.
There was one encounter where I guess this would bring out, again, Prabhupada's tolerance and also very, very skillful means, how to deal with an unusual situation, where I came in and I somehow whimsically thought I would start remodeling Prabhupada's apartment. I started moving the lamp and putting it on the floor and, you know, changing things around, you might say, without any rhyme or reason. And there were a couple of hippies there, and they didn't do anything to protect Prabhupada. They just kind of watching as if they were watching a movie, you know. And so Srila Prabhupada had to deal with it personally. So he stood up and very politely came, extended his hand to shake hands. I got more or less of a handshake with Prabhupada. And then he said, "I'm so glad you came. Thank you very much for coming. This is nice, very good. And by the way, the door is right over there." And he gracefully ushered me out. So that little incident showed his genius, how to deal. It could have been a lot rougher. If it was anyone else, I don't think it would have been as graceful as that.
Srila Prabhupada was so easily pleased by our actions. I remember at the Rath Yatra, the family dog auditorium, he was so pleased with that Rath Yatra. Just looking, I remember him after he gave his lecture, and he looked at all the hippies and all the crazy people and the smoke-filled room and everyone having a good time. And I think that was the time that I saw him most pleased. He looked at the people and he said, "This is such a wonderful process." He says, "Just look, you can dance, you know, for hours, dance and chant. And when you get tired of dancing and chanting, then you take prasadam." He says, "This is such a nice process." He says, everyone can be engaged. And he was just so pleased to see everybody engaging in Krishna consciousness. And I was given the responsibility to, or the opportunity, to actually make this little puffed rice knuckle dana. And he had a little decorated container in his office and on his desk. And he would, when kids came up or anybody, he was so pleased with everybody, so kind. He would just give them a little bit of this puffed rice. So I thought that was such a sweet thing. He was very reciprocal, and he was pleased with what we were doing, and we were pleased just to get a couple little grains of puffed rice from him. And he really encouraged us by showing that whatever you can do for Krishna, he was very satisfied with. And the more we can do, I think, you know, the more we can get satisfied, and I think we could do much more. I think that's the thing that he really struck my heart, is that you can do so much more. Because you could see him, he did more and more and more and more. And his vision of saving the world, sometimes him saving the whole universe, that we should conquer the whole universe, was you know, a big order for us. And he really wanted us to do that. So we have no excuse for sitting back being lazy. We've got a lot of work to do, even in our old age, to keep up with him.
I think Pusta Krishna was giving him a massage. No, he was reading from the fifth canto. The fifth canto had just come out, and Prabhupada was knocking the moon thing and going off on that. But Pusta Krishna was reading from the reactions to sinful activity part, and Prabhupada was taking his massage from whomever. Chechu Guru, actually. And Pusta Krishna looked up at Srila Prabhupada at one point and said, "Prabhupada, is this really what happens to someone when they do this?" And Prabhupada kind of chuckled. So it was almost, you couldn't understand whether he was like, he said yes, but the way he chuckled was sort of like, well, you know, it's not real, in the sense that we're spirit soul and we actually have nothing to do with this material world. Like Krishna says in the Bhagavatam, it's superfluous to the soul. So there was sort of that mood in his chuckle, I thought. But at the same time, he said, yes. So let's continue.
The most intense of all my encounters with Prabhupada was when I was really desperate. I had no money, I was on the street, and I came and I said, "Swamiji," still puffed up, extremely so. I said, "I'm like you. I'm spreading the word. I'm telling people about, you know, Krishna and Om and all these things. But I work all day and nobody gives me any money." And Prabhupada looked at me and he went, like, tisk, 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 you know, pathetic case. And then he became very serious and he said, "Simply join us and we will solve all your problems." Again, at the time when he said all your problems, I didn't know it was birth, death, disease, and old age. Later on I realized what he meant.
One time, Guru Kripa Maharaj wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada, and in this letter he expressed that the devotees were really having a hard time in Japan. There was a lot of opportunity for sense gratification, and sometimes devotees were taking advantage of it in various ways. And so Prabhupada wrote a letter, and in it he stated that the devotees are really struggling to do this collection here. And he was, I believe what he was trying to put across to Srila Prabhupada is, can we get out of here? You know, but the service was important because that's where the money was being collected for Vrindavan, Mayapur, and Bombay. So Prabhupada wrote back in his letter, "You should know that I am pleased when my devotees are struggling." So Krishna consciousness is not easy. Not easy to follow the principles of it, not easy to do the instructions, chanting 16 rounds, or, going to the Mangal Artik, and so many instructions. Now, and also service in Krishna consciousness may not be easy either. You may have to struggle hard to do that. But Prabhupada said, "You should know I am pleased when my devotees are struggling." Parentheses, for me, for my service, for Krishna's service.
I had one final darshan with Prabhupada in 1972. Now it wasn't so easy to sit down with Prabhupada because Prabhupada was now known as Prabhupada, and the Hare Krishna movement, of course, spread all around the world. This was in Boston, and the devotees kindly set up this darshan. When they introduced me to Srila Prabhupada, they made a mistake. They said, "This is Bhaktalan. He used to speak with you at 61 2nd Avenue in the early days." And now I had not become completely, cured of my craziness, but I was enough, sober that I knew I was dealing with someone that is extremely important. And I was already chanting Hare Krishna and, beginning the process. So I was too nervous to, this we hear from many devotees, how nervous they become in the presence of Prabhupada. So yeah, I had advanced enough that I was nervous to be with Prabhupada. So I couldn't bring myself to explain. No, it wasn't 61, it was 26. But at the same time, I wanted him to remember me. I wanted to connect the original encounters with this. So as we're walking in, we're sitting down, and to try to help Srila Prabhupada remember our conversations earlier, I said, Srila Prabhupada, when I used to speak with you in 1966, I was very crazy. And when Srila Prabhupada heard this, he raised his eyebrows and looked me right in the eye and said, oh, are you still crazy? He said it just like that. We heard different memories of Prabhupada showing how he could be so humorous. And he was teasing me. And it's like to make a crazy person become even crazier in a sense. Anyway, we sat down. He asked me, what are you doing? What is your situation? And I explained. I explained it in such a way as to try to convince Srila Prabhupada that I was no longer crazy. So in order to convince him I was no longer crazy, I said, I have 2 trucks. I have a business. I have a wife. I have an apartment. And I was thinking, if you have all these things and people, then you're not crazy. You know, I just thought that this is a sign that I wasn't crazy, and Prabhupada would be impressed by all this. And he said, that's okay. You don't have to move in the temple. Stay with your wife. Do your business. I only ask one thing of you. Simply try to understand Krishna. And that was a personal instruction. And I definitely offered my obeisances at this point. I got to that. I mean, I advanced up to that level. And as I was walking out, there was one other somewhat cryptic instruction where Srila Prabhupada, the last words I heard directly from Srila Prabhupada were, and we are not asking for any money. And that was the last I heard from Srila Prabhupada.
There is a darshan I also remember in Mayapur in his room. And Sudama Swami came in, and Siddha Swarup at that time, Maharaj, came in. Siddha Swarup was like effulgent as far as I was concerned. He was really interesting person. But there was some, I don't know, I'll say politics, going on between him and some of the bigger other sannyasis, GPC, whatever. And so when he came in the room, Prabhupada turned to Siddha Swarup and said, so Siddha Swarup Maharaj, I understand that you have a different philosophy than we do. And Siddha Swarup, well, Prabhupada, he said, isn't it, Sudama? Sudama kind of hangs his head. I don't want to get involved in this. And then Siddha Swarup said, well, Prabhupada, sometimes I preach to the householders that they should live outside the temple and have their own independent thing. Prabhupada said, yes, that's a very good idea. That's a good idea. And then he said, Siddha Swarup said, Prabhupada, you know, sometimes I just don't feel qualified. Prabhupada cut him off. And he said, qualified or unqualified, I love you. I was like, I mean, the way you said it was just, and I'd never met Siddha Swarup before, and then I talked to him privately later and heard a little bit about some of the stuff, but I just thought that was just the most liberal and affectionate statement that could come out of anybody's mouth, especially such an elevated personality. Qualified or unqualified, I love you.
Then I remember when Srila Prabhupada left, we were in Los Angeles, and there was a big, big celebration. Devotees were totally confused, but we somehow or another put on a huge celebration that went on all day long. And at that time also my parents had come to the temple. Somehow or another they came from New York to visit at that time. And my mother was in the temple all day through all of the festivities and stood and just watched the whole thing. And when my father heard that Prabhupada had left, he said, oh, the old man died? And Prabhupada affected everybody so deeply. His kindness is the kindness of Krishna. He saw the soul in all living beings. Everybody, all his disciples have felt that glance of Srila Prabhupada that just pierces through all of the anartas and bodily identification. So his kindness is what carries us all. And hopefully it will carry us all back to his lotus feet. Thank you. Je anilo prema dana karuna
Jayanilo Premadana Karuna Pra